To build a company, you have to have workers. And to house those workers, you need a community. A town owned and operated by the Phenix Company cropped up, lending itself its name.
Well, Phenix was just a part of me. And you could hear the whistle. And then when they shoot off the dynamite, it'd shake the windows.
Frank King grew up just outside the town limits, and his father worked inside the quarry.
One fall day, or morning, I went down with my dad. He had a team at Phenix, and it was a frosty morning. I remember going down the lantern and watching him harness the horses to get ready to work at Phenix. I could have been over 4 years old at the time. My first memories of Phenix, more or less, was, especially in wintertime, everything was steam. And you could see the old plumes are coming up.
In its heyday, at least 500 men, women, and children lived in the dozens of homes dotting the town.
Well, I was born October the 5th, 1933, and my mother and father owned 10 acres in a one-room cabin. There was houses up and down both sides of the road, very small, and you know, some of them were nicer, but most of them was 3 rooms.
Most were made of wood, painted in the company colors of red and yellow.
And how those big families lived in those little houses, I don't know, because they all had 2 or 3 kids, that on up.
This one, a parsonage for the Methodist Church, was a fancier one, made of rock from the quarry, its walls standing solid to this day.
There was one of them on the other side of the road.
To find more clues of the places these people called home, we had to go on a hike through the woods.
It was one of the bigger houses that people lived in that they rented.
Ben leads us through the brush and down this overgrown path.
Abbas and Lawrence Brady lived here for many, many years.
It was once a neighborhood road lined with houses on both sides. Now they're all gone, except for one. Tucked away is the very last Phenix house made out of wood, still sitting on its original spot.
They didn't have lights. Very few of the houses, like where the man that was the boss over the quarry, he had steam heat and electricity and running water, but the rest of them, they either had a hand pump or they drew it with a well bucket. All them years, and they didn't have no modern plumbing. You know, yeah, I can still remember it just like it's yesterday. I might put something up today and I can't remember where I put it. But, you know.
Then there was the 2-room schoolhouse for the kids.
Well, I went 7 years to school here at Phenix. My mother was a school teacher, and she made $110 a month and did the janitor work, taught all 8 grades.
I remember the good days and the bad days. Whether it was raining, snowing, or whatever, you walked to school. Yep. And then I would keep the fire going in the big stove. I remember that.
We didn't have no rich kids. There wasn't no rich kids back then. Some was a little bit better off than others, but we was more or less in the same boat.
Of course, we all went barefooted. Well, the first day of school, our teacher chewed tobacco, and he had one older boy that didn't want to sit down. And he was kind of dancing around. He turned him over the desk, and he had a switch about the size of my finger, and when he got unthrashed with that kid, he sat down. And he had no more trouble the rest of the year.
They had a little basketball goal out there, but nobody, we played softball, and we'd play ante-over, or tug-of-war, things like that. We'd have foot races. Didn't do a lot of things like like the kids have nowadays.
Had a good school, and had good teacher. I had 2 teachers. Back then I trapped quite a bit too, and one time I remember this, it embarrassed the far out of me, but I remember catching a skunk. And rather than take it to school, I killed it with a stick and left it so I could get it that night coming home and take it home. Well, I sat by the fire, and Reed Hurd was one of the teachers, and he said, "Herschel, move away from the stove." I never will forget that, because that sentence come out so strong, you know. That
There were at least 2 hotels, a Methodist church for the faithful, and a general store selling a little bit of everything.
There's sugar and stuff like that, flour, canned goods, peanut butter, peanut butter.
the people would buy groceries and then pay when they got paid. You know, they could handle that.
At one time, they paid the workers in scrip. The money had to be spent at the company store. It didn't take a lot of money to live back then. $1 at one time would buy lots of stuff.
The store also provided a place for people to chat and catch up on the goings-on of the community. Next door, it was the train station and post office, serving as the connections to the outside world.
When the train came in, it was everybody went down to see the train come in. And someone going and coming all the time. So it brought the mail in. Mr. Miles, he separated the mail and called out the mail for everybody.
When it come across the road from my house, there was a turntable at Ash Grove would turn a locomotive around and then to head it back towards Kansas City.
My uncle was an engineer on one of them, and lots of times I got to ride a train, you know. I remember getting up in the engine room with him and watch them guys shovel that coal in to keep it going, you know. It was quite a deal. I had an enjoyable young life, I really did.
It was no main line. Weeds covered the tracks, and the trains crept along. The railroad even earned the nickname Leaky Roof Line from the condition of its boxcars. You could get from Phenix to Ash Grove in about 15 minutes, if you were lucky.
And then one time, Dad was coming home from Ash Grove, and they stopped the train and was quail hunting out there in the middle, out in the field. The guys run the train. We went to Springfield one night, and I remember that very distinctly. Going to Springfield, staying all night with my mother's parents. My grandmother went to Springfield one time on the train. In the meantime, they'd gone from horse-drawn to electric streetcars. So they were all standing there, and my grandmother says, "Well, I guess they're having trouble getting the horses hooked up." And everybody laughed at her because they'd gone electric.